And democracy is the story that says you get to try to overcome your curse as a human because we're all the same. We all have the space as humans to generate and to make that joy and that beauty. And it doesn't matter who you are.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
For inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and we've been unpacking some cardboard boxes, enjoying our new house, our new old house, I should say. Later on the pod, Missy and I sat down with Brad Onishi and talked to him about the upcoming election. It is a fascinating conversation that we have, Brad, and we think that you're really going to enjoy it. So stay tuned. It's going to be a good pod. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I am well, and you?
I am positively giddy.
Are you now? Okay, that's a little scary for me and for our audience. So
I know. Pick
do
yourself
tell.
up off the floor
Exactly.
at this point.
Exactly.
Right? So, yes, I am in a good mood. We have, let me correct that. I have spent the last week unpacking at our house.
You have, and you've done a stellar job.
So yes, for those of you who've been following along, we have been in renovation purgatory for 6 months.
Forever.
Yes, we are finally in our home. So I have a question. Do you remember when you're a child and you go out of town, maybe on vacation or visit grandparents or whatever, you're gone for a while. Do you remember that feeling of coming back home when you see your toys?
Yes.
For the first time. And you're so
excited.
Happy.
Yeah.
Okay. This is me right now. I'm unpacking our things after everything's been in storage for 6 months.
Yeah.
So, top of the list is my couch, right?
Right.
My butt print is literally still in my cushion. I was so excited. It just fits like a glove. But I had an experience this week with finding a couple of random things I was not expecting.
Oh, really? What's that?
To be excited about. So as our regular listeners may know, that we have downsized significantly. And so unpacking includes a lot of getting rid of things that we've packed because we can't fit, but also the very most satisfying game of Tetris I've ever played.
Yeah, sure.
So I have been, again, unpacking a kitchen, trying to figure everything out. So I'm on a step stool, trying to organize the spice cabinet, fitting things in. I've got this little, as seen on TV, shelving kind of situation. Anyway, so I'm putting things up and something falls on the counter and spills. And I didn't see it immediately, but that was okay.
Okay.
I smelled it.
Oh, no. What was it?
And immediately tears to my eyes.
Oh my gosh.
I was so happy.
Oh.
Do you know what it was?
Oh, it had to be like something fall. I mean, like cinnamon or...
No.
No?
Cumin.
Cumin? Oh my gosh, cumin?
The smell came up and I was like, I am home. I am home.
Nothing says like home, like
cumin.
cumin.
Like cumin. Can you tell I'm a Texas girl? Like Tex-Mex all the way. Like everything I make, everything I've cooked, which I haven't cooked in 6 months, but everything has cumin in it.
It does. It indeed does.
Immediately, I was not expecting that. But I was like, that was the first thing I just was so happy about. You want to know the second thing?
Green chilies?
Yes. I unpacked the box of Hatch green chili.
I know you don't like cilantro, so I went green chilies.
No, cilantro, my cans of Hatch green chilies. And yes, I was super excited, although you can't smell those. No. So the other thing I was super excited unexpectedly to see, my sleep shorts.
Like those 1970 type shorts you wear to bed?
Like Walmart athletic shorts. Yes, the
Oh
ones I
my gosh.
accidentally packed when we were moving, thinking, I don't know, it was going to be
Okay,
a
well, so
few
now
weeks.
all of this is starting to make sense because for like 6 months you've been wearing like jean shorts and jeans to bed. I kind of wondered why, but okay, that makes sense now.
I accidentally packed all of my sleep shorts, and why I did not go to like Walmart or Target and buy new sleep shorts is beyond
Oh
me.
my
I
gosh, that's
don't know.
hysterical.
I just found an old pair of soft like denim shorts and
Yeah.
have been sleeping in those.
That is so funny.
So yes, I found my sleep shorts. So
That's remarkable.
yeah, so it's just been fun to uncover random things that you weren't expecting to find.
Yes.
As we've been unpacking our house, a little life update. Do you have anything that you found that was
Oh my
particularly
gosh,
exciting?
yes. It was just this week. I was like rifling through the drawers after you had unpacked everything. Again,
Exactly.
thank you.
Exactly.
And Missy, you're not going to believe what I found.
What did you find?
I found the Ninja blender.
Did you now?
I mean, it was like right there. You had hidden it for 6 months, but I finally
Whatever.
found it.
Whatever. If you heard last week's episode, you will recall that Ninja blender was exactly where I told you it was for the last 6 months, completely accessible to you. You could have been using it.
So
all
for 6
this
months,
time.
no smoothies for Mitch, but this last
But
5
now
days, nothing but smoothies.
You've had smoothies every day. So yes, the Ninja blender has been found. What was once lost has now been found.
It has now found.
Yes.
That's exactly
so, yeah,
right.
So that's a little life update for us. So I have been consumed with all things, unpacking
Yeah.
and settling in between answering emails and, trying to get some work done. You have been in your office cave because things are really busy.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're aware of this, Missy, because you've been unpacking boxes and getting rid of our cardboard castle that we had in our living room. But there's a little election taking place in a couple of
Well,
weeks.
I spent the last 5 or 6 days in denial,
Okay,
so that's been a very happy place for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
So I appreciate being unplugged from it
Right.
for a minute. But I'm guessing you're about to ruin that for me.
Well, there's a lot going on this week in the news. And one of the things that I think really is a good transition topic for us to talk about leading into our conversation with Brad Onishi this week, which is remarkable. Always
He's
loving to
wonderful.
have Brad on the show. But there has been an elevation of criticism by against the former president by his former cabinet members. Which was his chief of staff, General John Kelly, who sounded out a warning, basically saying, because there's been a lot of talk recently about, is Trump a fascist? He denies it, but Kelly said...
Who's going to admit that, though?
I know, right? Who's going to admit that? But Kelly said he fits the classical definition of a fascist. A notable historian in the news this week also said that he changed his mind regarding declaring Trumpism as a fascist movement. So there's been a lot of movement within the last 2 weeks of really trying to define Trumpism and Trump in particular as a fascist movement and him as a fascist in general. It's just been really fascinating to watch. I don't know if he meets the criteria, but what I do know is that he's saying all the things that fascists have said throughout history.
I just remember an old saying that my parents used to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck,
It's a duck.
it's a duck.
That's right.
So
yeah.
wise words, right?
Very wise words. So that's been an interesting development over the last couple of weeks. Another very interesting development that happened just a couple of days ago before this pod dropped is news broke out of Russia that North Korea has sent troops to Russia. Now, Lloyd Austin, who's Secretary of Defense, can't necessarily say why they're there, but all indication is that they're going to be used to fight on the front lines against the Ukrainians, which is a huge escalation of that conflict. So that's taking place. Still lots going on in the Middle East. People still crying out for a ceasefire there, as people are still dying, especially Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
It's horrific.
It is horrific. And so there's a lot going on in the world that has developed in these last few days, it is a reminder how important the next couple of weeks will be for not only the future of our country, but the future of the free world. And so we always want to encourage everybody to participate in democracy, get out to vote. We were bragging last week. We want to continue bragging about people showing up at early voting sites to vote. One of our good friends posted the other day that she had to stand in line for 2 hours to vote, and that's always a good thing. That's a good thing for democracy.
Right. I've heard several of our friends talk about their wait in line to vote, early vote. I mean, it must be nice to be able to early vote, right? I mean, in Oklahoma, I think you get 2 days or something.
Right. Yeah.
So I think our plan is to vote on Halloween.
Yeah, we got to go down to a local chicken coop and vote.
That's right. So it hasn't not opened for us yet, but we're very excited, and we hope that we're standing in line for a couple of hours. I mean, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So lots going on, and that's why it was so important to have this conversation with Brad Onishi this week. Brad is full of wisdom, and always enjoy our conversations with him.
Yeah, I love talking to Brad. He meets me where I'm at, which is the pit of despair.
So way to tee it up, Missy.
This is what I love about him.
So stay tuned. Missy and I are going to be right back with Brad Onishi.
So much of what I learned in church was about doing instead of being. Pray this prayer. Affirm this belief. Save your soul. But doesn't our faith teach us that there's nothing we can do to earn or escape God's love? I'm Brett Harris, host of God Knows Where. And if we can't do anything, then I think we need to better understand who we're supposed to be. Join me for Wayfinding, a new series exploring Jesus' parables to discover who God calls us to be. Find God Knows Where on your favorite podcast platform.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Brad Onishi is a social commentator, scholar, writer, teacher, coach, and co-host of the Straight White American Jesus podcast with Daniel Miller. The pod ranks in the top 50 political shows on Apple's podcast charts. We had Brad on the pod back in 2023 to discuss his book, Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. Brad, it's only been a year, but there's been a lot of water under the bridge. So welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
It's great to be here. Always great to talk to the both of you. Thankful for the invitation, and it's a busy time. A lot going on.
So before we get into, before we get into the heavy topics today, sorry. Last year we had you on. You were right about the time you had a baby, or I guess you didn't have the baby, but you know what I mean. So let's just start off with something happy. How's that going? How's the baby?
Yeah, she's great. She's amazing. So we have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. The 1-year-old's birthday was a couple weeks ago, and on that day, her 3-year-old sister put a bead up her nose, and so we spent the night in the emergency room.
I know it's not funny, but oh my gosh.
It is funny. It is very much funny. And then she actually was sick last week, and it was fairly not fun and scary. But she's amazing. She's very different than her sister. They're two different kids. But life is really full right now. It's full of joy and smiles and all that. It's also full of a lot of pressure and trying to get people fed and diapers changed and so I've never been more busy
with no pressure for the future world that we're creating for them, right?
No pressure.
No, and I'm all yeah.
I mean, when he described parenting, feeding, and changing diapers, that kind of sounds like what we do sometimes at Good Faith Media. Just feed and change diapers. That's all we do.
There's a whole lot of them.
A whole lot of them.
Yeah.
Y'all are like, whenever I talk to you, I'm like, it's hard to imagine your kids are as old as they are because you all look so young. And then, we're probably around the same age. And here my kids are. So I'm like a geriatric dad. And like when we go to the park, people are like, "Oh, your grandpa brought you to the park." And I'm like, "No, this is my child. This is my kid." So,
Oh man, I love it. Well, just so you know, it doesn't get any easier. So how's that for some?
right. That's right.
perfect. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, on to today's topic.
Well, Brad, last time we talked was when your book was released. Admittedly, you were not painting the most rosy picture for us a year ago as Christian nationalists were preparing for literal war. Now, we thought that might have been a tad hyperbole, but the reality is, I mean, just last week, news broke about an armed militia, quote unquote, hunting FEMA workers. So, since the release of the book, have you seen the environment get worse for political violence? Are you concerned in the next 30 days that political violence is possible? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. I am concerned, to put it bluntly. And I think the attack on FEMA workers is another thing to add to the list of small fires that we've seen across the country. That could be bomb threats on the IRS because of something that to do with Trump and classified documents. That could do bomb threats on judges. That could be state houses that are evacuated. That could be doxing of public officials. That could be intimidating folks who work at elections and volunteered elections and so on and so forth. So I am concerned. And I think that if you take the whole picture into account, what you're seeing is there's a lot of efforts on state levels for there to be, quote unquote, reasons to call into question the election results. That could be West Virginia, that could be Georgia, that could be Arizona, that could be wherever. And what has happened over the last 4 years is something I've tried to warn about incessantly, is that when you let the big lie and the January 6th event connected to it fester in your politics and in your public square for 4 years, and then let the guy who is at the helm of that run again, you're legitimating it. So now when you claim election suspicious behavior, suspicious results, funny business, shenanigans, wherever and whenever, there is a category that people have accepted, and they can put it in that category and say, yep, they're at it again. And so we are going to see that. And I want to be just upfront about it. Kamala Harris might win 380 electoral votes. You will see in the weeks and months after that anything possible to call into question the legitimacy of those results on state levels, at state houses, in capitals. And that is what's ahead, even if we get a result where Trump is not elected again.
See, Brad, one of the things that I am really concerned about, I mean, obviously, a lot of concern about Election Day itself, voter intimidation, armed people showing up, at polling places, just the kind of the same rhetoric that we have seen, as well as the same actions that we have seen from the rise of Christian nationalists and nationalists at large. And let's just call it what it is. They're fascist. But also the days following. And the scene is set for the potential for political violence. And I give you an example of Georgia. Georgia has changed their voting laws. They have to now count by hand each vote that's cast. I mean, that's going to take days. And my concern is that some of these armed vigilantes are going to show up where these counts are taking place and make threats, or actually carry out those threats when votes are still being counted. And with an election so tight in states like Georgia and Arizona, that could make a huge difference. Is that far-fetched, or is that a possibility?
No, that is. We did get some good news yesterday on this. So that the judge, there is a Georgia, the judge who was overseeing that case did block the election rule requiring the hand count in Georgia. So that's good news for now. Good news, yeah. But it points to a larger trend, which is not only call into question the election results, but create situations where you can intimidate those who are tallying the votes. Or, as we've seen with Lance Wallnau and Christopher Standifer and their Courage Tour, recruit people to be those in the room counting the votes, people who are conspiracy theorists themselves, people who adhere to the big lie, people adhere to a spiritual warfare mentality where they think Kamala Harris is demon possessed or controlled by Satan. And so those efforts are also underway. And so this is what I mean when I say that we're heading toward Election Day and it's going to be a rough road no matter what. I think you're pointing at exactly why. in 2020, January 6th was the culmination of dozens of efforts, legally and otherwise, to stop Joe Biden from becoming president. For the most part, the state level mechanics all worked. The fake electors were not allowed to be representing their states in the Electoral College. We had people like Raffensperger in Georgia not give Trump 11,000 votes he wanted. We saw all those state level levers of government operate as they should.
Right.
The question now is, will that happen again?
Exactly.
Because they've had 4 years to kind of see if they can't find soft tissue in those parts of the machine or parts of the body. And so we will see if they're able to kind of gum up some of those processes.
Yeah.
So, Brad, we have some specific issues we want to talk to you about in a moment. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about Project 2025. A couple of weeks ago, we talked to Skye Perryman from Democracy Forward about some of the particulars. And we also want to hear from you. The murmurings that I'm hearing or that are kind of going around is, oh, it's just a document. It's nothing, don't pay attention to that. It's not that bad, or here's some good, we're seeing a lot of just dismissive language about it, but we tend to disagree. So help us understand what your thoughts are on Project 2025. Does it have the potential to jeopardize our entire democracy?
I think it does. And so I would say a couple things. It should not be dismissed, and it should not be considered something that Trump doesn't have in his orbit, or that the people around Trump who are influential and chomping at the bit to implement policies and laws and executive orders are not part of. Russ Vought, Vought, Russ Vought is somebody who's widely considered to be in the running to be chief of staff in Trump's White House, should he gain office again. So that is an overwhelmingly important position. He was caught on camera about a month and a half ago saying that he spends his days thinking about how to implement Project 2025. So, and he admitted on camera that, there has to be some distance between Trump and Project 2025. They have to kind of make it as if it's not something that is part of the president's plans or on his horizon, the former president, I should say. And yet Vought outlines in this video how the key tenets of Project 2025 are the priorities that he will have as chief of staff or a key player in the Trump administration. The training videos for Project 2025 have been leaked by ProPublica. A dozen Trump administration officials or campaign officials are part of the videos training people to implement 2025, including Catherine Leavitt, who's the one that's been telling the press Donald Trump doesn't know anything about Project 2025.
Right. Yeah.
So the idea that this is not part of the plan surrounding Trump is false. And there's evidence for that, whether in video, whether in statements, whether in the Project 2025 materials themselves. Now, will it jeopardize our democracy? I think the answer is yes. And here's why. Right now, we have tens of thousands of federal workers who are tasked every day with going to work and sitting at a desk, working at an agency, carrying out a job where they are an expert in a certain thing. It could be education policy. It could be a Department of State diplomacy program. It could be them working on environmental protections or whatever it may be at the State Department, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, and so on and so forth. If you put all of those folks on Schedule F, meaning they can be fired at will without any sort of need for reasoning in terms of job performance, every person in those positions is now a presidential loyalist. They are an extension of one executive leader. Because if you don't do what the leader says, they will just fire you and find somebody who will. What happened in the first Trump administration is over and over again, Trump and his cronies tried to get folks in these departments to do things that were against the law, against policy, not safe, right? And against standards that have been developed over decades to make sure these agencies and our government runs how it should. That is no longer possible. So if you are not a Trump loyalist under Project 2025, you will be dismissed and they will find somebody that will do what they want. And that will include rounding up 10 or 20 million people to deport them from the country. That will include perhaps, getting rid of the entire Department of Education. That will include striking any mention of climate change from any federal documents. That will include statements from the federal government that declare that the only type of family that is legitimate is a man and a woman who are married, cisgender, and having children. I could go on and on about all the things Project 2025 is. I think a lot of folks have talked about that. I think what's important to see is that this is the dream for a lot of folks. If you can just give power to one person who is largely unchecked by administration, by bureaucrats, by experts, then that person can affect a change like we've never seen when it comes to presidential power and changing our country. That is the desire, is a one person with unchecked power. Now you'll say, well, we still have checks and balances. And I'll remind you that A, Trump has said he wants to be a dictator. He's already told us that. But B, his running mate, J.D. Vance, has already outlined the plan for when the judicial branch tries to check the executive branch. He said in a podcast, look, on the first day, Donald Trump should fire every federal worker and install our people. Mm-hmm. And then if it ever comes about that the Supreme Court rules this to be unconstitutional or anything else unconstitutional, Donald Trump should look at Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and say, where's your army? Because I know where mine is. Jeez. Right? That's basically an idea of saying, hey, I'm the commander in chief.
Right.
I know the military is on the other end of my phone call. Do you have one? Because if you don't, sit down and be quiet. And then you look at Congress, and we've got Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, somebody who did everything possible to overturn the 2020 election. We already know how he's going to go in this scenario. Mm-hmm. And Project 2025 starts to look like the first step in unchecked executive authority, which is not something we're supposed to have in a democracy based on checks and balances.
And Brad, Missy is going to ask you some more specifics on some issues, but to ask this in conjunction with what you just said, and the Supreme Court has now given legal precedent for a lot of these agencies to be stripped of any kind of power and oversight with the repeal of Chevron deference. And now it doesn't really matter what these agencies say because now they have no authority to act upon it. And case after case, we're hearing that the decision to repeal Chevron is being cited as reasons to harm the environment, to act in inappropriate ways and unjust ways. And this just fits in. I mean, I said a moment ago that the stage was set for political violence after Election Day. Well, the stage is set for the implementation of Project 2025 from day one, legally as well.
I think what's so just gut-wrenching to me about everything you just said about Project 2025 isn't as much the people who say, oh, it's not really going to happen or don't worry about it, it's just a document. But it's more the camp and the number of people in our country who are like, yeah, I'm good with that. He can go in there on day one and fire all these federal workers, and I'm okay with that. That is what is terrifying to me.
Yeah, 7.5 million people said they were okay with that in 2020.
I cannot believe that.
Right.
But here we are. Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, I agree. I give talks all over the country, and one of the things I do is I show people a clip from the Young Turks interviewing a man in Iowa at the caucuses. And the question to that man is, would you rather have Joe Biden as president for the next 4 years or Donald Trump as dictator for the next however long? And he says these words, well, I prefer Donald Trump as a dictator because this country needs a dictator.
Right.
And then what I do is I say, okay, so that's a man on the street. We might write him off. Mr. Trump rally, Trump hat, MAGA shirt, good for you. But then I go to all of the quotes from theologians, pastors, people who have sway over hundreds of thousands or millions of Christians, people who are philosophers at places like Notre Dame or elected senators. And they say the same thing, that we are so degenerate as a society that we need an unchecked executive or what you might call a dictator, because that would just be better. And in addition, just going back to what you said earlier about Chevron, the war on expertise has been going on a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ronald Reagan used to say, "Oh, you want a little bureaucrat with a pencil in Washington D.C. somewhere telling you what to do," right? Then we got to the Tea Party and we got to the whole idea of like regulation and these people don't know anything. Who says science and right? And then we got to the pandemic. Same thing. Anti-vax, anti-Fauci, right? If you think about Chevron and Project 2025, it's the culmination of the attack on expertise. Oh, you might be an environmental scientist who studied this for 45 years and devoted your life to it. Sorry, we have a new Trump appointee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whose main expertise is in running the World Wrestling enterprise. And they're going to just sort of like dictate policy when it comes to the environment in federal land in Alaska, or what's happening in Montana. Department of Education, we don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of that, right? The war on expertise, there's two sides of it. One is get rid of the people that actually know so you can appoint folks to do whatever you want. And two, give all the power to one person and let them do their will. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, they're making him the Holy Roman Empire or Emperor.
So, okay, there seem to be kind of two key issues right now driving that are driving force within kind of both camps, so to speak. The first one I want to talk about is the restrictions on abortion care across the country. So how much do you think this is really going to impact the outcome of the election? Do you think it's going to, or has the hate fire waned on this? Or is that still going to get people to the polls, you think?
I think if you look at Kamala Harris's numbers with women, there's a clear line to a vote for Kamala Harris and reproductive rights. And I think that's women of all ages. I think we're seeing the numbers out right now are showing that the largest percentage of white women in history are about to vote for a Democratic candidate. And so to me, that is a direct referendum on reproductive rights. You might be a 20-year-old woman, you might be a 58-year-old woman, you might be a 75-year-old woman. This is an issue that, regardless of how you think of Kamala Harris on the economy, the environment, education, fill in the blank, you can see a path where it's like, I'm not voting for a national abortion ban. I'm not voting for them to allow women to bleed out on tables. I'm not voting for them to allow women to go to jail because they had a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. So we're not doing that. And, and so I think this is a clear driver of votes away from Trump. And he's tried to sidestep it. He's tried to do a dance. He's tried to say he's pro-choice, and none of it has worked. And so I do believe that's a big, big issue on the table right now.
So on the flip side, what Trump seems to be camping out on so much right now is immigration, and that fires his base up. Is that enough to swing that the other direction for him? Are people upset enough about this? Is he convincing everybody enough that everyone coming into this country, in particular those without white skin, are evil? Is that
so? This is the big question. Yeah, this is the big question, right? And I think one of the advantages you have if you are campaigning on reproductive rights versus immigration in, say, the Midwest, the Great Plains, the upper Midwest, right? The industrial Midwest, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, is you can look at that. You can look at women, and the statistics say, right, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 have had an abortion or a need for some kind of reproductive care along those lines, and say, this is a thing that affects your life right now. This is the thing you can see affecting of your life going forward. And it could be ectopic pregnancy. It could be a miscarriage in trimester 2. It could be an unwanted pregnancy, whatever. This affects you. And I think there's a way you can say that to any person who can get pregnant, right? Mm-hmm. The immigration thing, we have this data out from Sam Perry and others that's like, the less exposure you have to immigrants, the more anti-immigrant rhetoric works on you.
Yeah. So
you might live in like Kansas, the literal center of the United States, and hear anti-immigrant rhetoric, and there's a chance it'll be more effective to swaying you to Trump, the GOP, to whatever, than if you live in El Paso or San Diego. And so, unfortunately, the rhetoric has gotten more dark, more dire, more disgusting. And unfortunately, we're in a place where Donald Trump somehow is running neck and neck with Kamala Harris, and he's doing so largely on the basis of saying that immigrants are poisoning the blood and soil of this country and that they're not human. Not only is it working, at least in some regard, it portends what's ahead for a next Trump administration if he's able to get back into the White House. It does not portend a society of peace and rest. That it portends one where even those folks who are legal immigrants will be under suspicion, attacked on the street, rounded up. I mean, J.D. Vance said, I consider the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, to be illegal, even though they have papers and documentation, right? Think about what he's saying. I don't care if you have papers. If you're the wrong kind of immigrant, you're illegal to me.
It's
and I'm going to find a way to
terrifying.
make you illegal.
Yeah. It's terrified. All right. Well, Brad, we're winding down to our final couple of questions. I want to play a game with you, a political imagination, with the understanding that Christian nationalism is not going to go away anytime soon, no matter who is elected. It's just their emphasis and arenas are going to change after November. So with that said, let's play this game. What do you expect in the first 100 days of a second Trump presidency?
I expect a couple things. I expect there to, the first things I expect are swift action on immigration that we just talked about. I think you'll see people like Stephen Miller and others try to build what they are dreaming of right now, which are large-scale camps all across the country that hold hundreds of thousands of people, and a desire to set up a system that flies out tens of thousands of migrants to various countries each day: Mexico, Guatemala, Haiti, Nicaragua, and so on and so forth. So I think that's there. I also think you'll see revocations of certain immigration programs, like the program, the TPS program that allows many of the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, to be here with documentation, to be revoked, right? So I think you'll see that very clearly. So I think that's number one. I think you will see political enemies sort of in the crosshairs, and people who are in need of retribution, according to Trump and his administration, being handed that retribution in some form. This is going to be a revenge administration. Yeah. This is not like, hey, I never expected to be here, and look at me, I'm in the White House. That was the first one. Jared Kushner had like 88 jobs. He had no idea what he's doing. Scaramucci was in there. It was a whole mess. Yeah. This is now
it's the revenge tour.
Yeah.
We got all the adults. We're all resentful, and we're here to hurt the people that need to be hurt.
And
that's what I think.
And the irony of all that, Brad, is that those in his crosshairs probably first are going to be his fellow Republicans who thought they could work with him and then turned on him as he would see it. And he will come after them first, I think. Cheney, all of them, he'll go after them.
Cheney, Romney, Kinzinger,
Meadows,
Biden family, Clinton family. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Second question, using your imaginations, what would be, what do you expect the first 100 days of a Harris presidency to look like?
Yeah, I think what we'll have are a couple things. I think Harris is going to do everything Harris can to build the economy she's promising. So that is like taking action on things that she thinks actually affect people in real life. So that's mortgage, programs that help people, first-time home buyers, and other things like that. I think that also includes inflation reduction and the cost of groceries, the cost of utilities going down for people. I think there'll be a real focus there. However, and not to be just even less of a fun person to talk to at a party, but that first 100 days will be full of all kinds of shenanigans and everything possible attempts to gum up the process. You will see sheriffs, constitutional sheriffs, say that they're not going to recognize the authority of the federal government because the president is not elected duly.
Mhm.
You will see counties that start to talk about secession. You will see state legislatures try to not certify the election, and even if they're forced to, lawsuits and appeals and everything else. You will see marches and demonstrations that say, this is not my country or my president. You will see action from militias and right-wing groups that are going to try to use force to basically say, we don't accept what is happening here. So I do think we will see small fires across the country that will have to be dealt with by the federal government, and it will be a really difficult and delicate time when it comes to those things. So I think in terms of policy, there's going to be a focus on the everyday life of Americans and making that easier. I think in terms of reality, you're going to see a lot of folks not accepting the reality that Donald Trump is not president. A black woman is president. An Asian woman is president.
Mhm.
Her husband is Jewish. And, she has a completely multiracial, multi-faith identity that will just be like everything hateful Barack Obama endured times 5, because she is a woman, she's Asian, she's black, she's Hindu, she's Baptist, whatever they want to say. They're going to have even more hateful and terrible things to paint their canvas than they did when Barack Obama was president.
Well, Brad, I'm not going to really say it was a joy talking to you, but it's always a pleasure, my friend, because you're full of wisdom and insight, and I know our listeners really enjoy learning from you. So thank you so much for spending some time with us this week on Good Faith Weekly. But before we let you go, Missy's got one last question that she wants to ask you.
First, I want to say it was a joy for me. You know how much I revel in despair. So thank you.
Yeah, if there's one thing that brings her joy, it's despair.
So thank you, Brad, for your time today. But as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
So we have some events coming up I'd love to invite people to, and they are in the weeks after the election. And we want to help people process what's going on. So November 21st will be in LA. November 22nd will be in San Diego. You can find all the info on our social media pages at Straight White American Jesus. You can go to bradonishi.com/events. We'll have great people there: Andrew Seidel, Rachel Lazar, Matthew Taylor, me and Dan from Straight White American Jesus, and others who can really help people process what's going on and prepare for what's next. So we want to do that in the weeks after the election. I also just want to say, and cut me off here because I know we're supposed to be going, but the more to tell is that democracy is the best story we have.
Yep.
And we can overlook that because democracy can start to feel a little trite and like an empty box with nothing in it. Like, oh, we got to protect democracy. But a lot of folks sort of aren't sure what that means for them. And I just want to say, like, very clearly that democracy is a story. It says that you and I and everyone are equal. All right, we hear that a lot. But what it really says is you and I and everyone else we have the same condition. We have the human condition.
Yeah.
And having a condition is hard. A lot of people listening have conditions, whether they're medical, congenital, whatever it may be. And that's difficult. We all have the human condition. Every other political way of governing doesn't tell a story that way. They say some people have this condition, the aristocrats for the kings or the white race, and other people have that condition. So that's why we're different, and that's why society gets broken up this way. Democracy says we were all thrown into this world without choosing, and we all have to leave at some point, and we all have the same condition of being pulled between the past and the future. And those are ones we didn't choose and we can't control, and it's pretty hard being human most of the time. That's our condition. And it's like full of darkness and vulnerability and pain. And we all know that. Don't need to go over it. But it's also full of wonder and creativity and joy. Every time we sing, every time we write, every time we dance, every time we break bread, every time we reach out and we love another human being with reciprocity and openness, we overcome the curse of that condition with an overwhelming, bedazzling, saturating beauty. And democracy is the story that says you get to try to overcome your curse as a human through that joy and that beauty, because we're all the same. We all have the space as humans to generate and to make that joy and that beauty. And it doesn't matter who you are, rich or poor, black or brown, Asian or white, you have that condition, which is hard to live with and also offers the potential for the most dazzling wonder the universe could ever see. So this is our story, and we're going to tell it. And it's not gonna be reduced to trite cliches, and we're not going to let fascists or Christian nationalists or anyone else tell us that some of us have this condition and some of us have that one, and those with that condition matter less. No. Democracy is our story. Christian, Hindu, Muslim, agnostic, humanist, atheist, we all get to pursue the chance of being the wonder the universe allows us to be, even though most of the time the human condition is one of hurt and fragility. So democracy is our best story, and we should tell it really proudly.
I love that.
Love it.
And Brad, we're getting to read the first couple of paragraphs of that story in this chapter of Democracy with the news breaking yesterday. Record turnout in the state of Georgia. The lines at polling places looked like election day lines, a decade ago. I mean, people are participating in democracy, and that's always a good thing.
Amen. Love that.
Well, Brad, again, always good to have you on Good Faith Weekly. You're welcome back anytime, and we'll have you again on the show after the election to give us some great analysis post-election, whatever
I'm going to come back
is.
and I'm going to talk about flowers and dolphins, lemonade. We're going to talk about.
Excellent. I love that.
Let's hope
I'm
so.
going to show you
Except
pictures
I
of
may
my
not.
dog.
I may not be allowed to speak at that point. So you two have fun.
That's all right. Thanks, Brad. Take care.
Thank you.
He never disappoints. Always brings something to the table that challenges me and gets me to thinking.
He does. I take issue with only one thing that he said.
Okay, what is that?
Which is that he's the least fun person to talk to at a party. And my friend Brad, sorry, I wear that title proudly.
He's going to win the silver medal on that one every time.
You take silver. There's no committee. I've got gold every time.
You are the world champion. That's hysterical.
It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Again, I said I always enjoy talking to Brad. I feel like he meets me where I'm at.
Yeah.
But you and I have talked about over the last several weeks and months, and since talking to him about just the fear and the reality of political violence that has happened or may happen, and people who are using the Bible to justify this.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked to Brad a year ago when his book was released about preparing for war and how, evangelicals across the country were arming themselves in this preparation for what eventually could be Armageddon in their mind, but also to defend themselves because somehow they have equated the Second Amendment to Scripture. But that's another story and another thing that we can talk about later on. But
people do say, what we hear, the common trope is, well, Jesus turned over tables and he said, grab your sword.
Good point. Yeah.
I mean, we hear that quite a bit, especially where we live.
Yeah. I mean, there is this, and let's be honest about it, because, Jesus was not necessarily a pacifist in the classical sense. Jesus stood up to authority. Jesus stood up to empire. And yes, he turned tables over in the temple when he saw injustice unveil itself in front of his eyes. And so he stood up for the oppressed and marginalized. But probably one of the most noted moments in Scripture happens in the Gospel of Luke when Jesus and the disciples are heading to Jerusalem for the final time. And it is the apex of the gospel narrative. Jesus knows that when he enters Jerusalem, he's probably going to be arrested because there's been so much pressure placed upon him by the temple authorities as well as those who have Roman authority. And so as they're entering, he actually tells the disciples to make certain that they're armed. And they follow their rabbi's orders. They actually, sell their cloaks to make certain that they have weapons upon them, which, we'd call a sword, but it really was probably a long knife kind of thing.
So make that make sense, because He said it.
Well, okay, and this is where it makes sense, is because historically, in that time period, there were a lot of messianic figures. And in every instance, it was a political and military revolt against those in authority. So it was an attempt, like we saw on January 6, 2021, to overthrow the government, whether that was Rome or temple authority. It was always ended in violence. And Jesus was nervous, and we see this nervousness come to a head in the Garden of Gethsemane. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He knows what's expected of him. He knows the crowds will be there for him, and we see that after he's arrested and put on trial, and there's that moment where Pilate brings out Barabbas. We know that if he were to say the right thing and to point to the disciples to attack, that a revolt would be on and Jerusalem would be in chaos.
And that's what the crowd was hoping for.
That's what the crowd is hoping for. That is what some of the disciples are hoping for. We know Judas is hoping for it. That's why he betrayed him. So it is tense. And Jesus is trying to figure out exactly how this is going to unfold. And this, we see him at his most human, not only in Gethsemane, but leading up to Gethsemane. And so the moment in Gethsemane, after he prays that prayer, not my will be done, but thy will be done, immediately what happens? They show up to arrest him. It's on. The moment for Jesus to make a decision is at its apex. He could tell the disciples, attack. They had weapons. Now, he doesn't say that, but Peter thinks he's going to say it. So it's Peter who pulls out the long knife and cuts off the ear of the servant. And it's that moment before Jesus' eyes that he realizes violence is not the answer. And he tells Peter to sheathe his sword, for those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And it was probably one of the most important moments in human history, because Jesus chose another way to conquer empire, and it was a way of love, sacrifice, and justice. So that is an amazing moment. So when we hear evangelicals especially talk about violence as a legitimate tool to bring about their political will, they are going against the very idea and practice of the one they call Lord.
So my question would be, when you say they're using violence to bring about political will, will you clarify? Because I feel like the thinking is they're using violence to bring about what someone would consider God's will.
Yeah, and that's exactly what previous messianic figures during the days of Jesus would think as well, that they were using violence to bring about the will of God. But Jesus flips that on its head and says, no, the will of God will not be brought about by violence. The will of God will be brought about by love and justice, and those two things alone. And we see him go to the cross as this incredible act of love to bring justice to the entire world.
Well, that's a good word.
That's
Pastor.
a good word. Sorry, you asked me. You asked me about Scripture. I started talking about Scripture. Got excited about it. Apologize.
You totally did. No, I think that's a good word, because we hear that quite often.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we do.
Yeah.
Jesus said to take your sword. Jesus flipped tables. And, we see the images of churches now that have swords in the shape of a cross.
Yeah. Well, remember
the
this.
pulpit.
It was about the same time we talked with Brad. We had Jeff Charlotte on. And he had a new book out. And, he actually went across the country and visited with these churches. And remember that scene in that one church that he talked about in his book where, it was a cross made out of gun barrels. It was crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, at that point, you've lost sight.
Yeah, you have
lost sight.
Absolutely, you've lost sight. So at any rate, I, like Brad, very concerned about political violence over the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think he's right in saying that if it happens, it could happen after Election Day. Also, maybe when the certification of the votes on January 6, 2025 takes place in Washington, D.C. There is a big concern because there is an affinity by some within the Christian faith itself and the country at large that thinks that the only way to bring about their will is through political violence, and that should be denounced by any reasonable person.
100%.
So again, Brad always gets me thinking, and I really appreciate having him on the pod this week. But lots going on leading up to the election. We're just a little over a week away, Missy. So we want to encourage everybody to get out, stand in line, even if it's 2 to 3 hours, cast your vote, because as the late Representative and Baptist minister John Lewis used to say, a vote is as sacred as a prayer. So let's get out there and offer our prayers and cast our votes.
It is. Until that time, I'm going to go back to unpacking boxes.
Well, hopefully you'll find something of hope will come out of one of those boxes.
I hope so.
So until next week, folks, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.